All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to Foundations of Business Management 1104. As we're entering into our second week, we're going to start to tackle Chapter 4 today. This is Ethics and Corporate Social Responsibility. So this is Chapter 4 of your textbook. Again, the first 5 modules are a little bit out of order as relevant to the textbook, but don't worry, you'll start to see how it matches up for you very well. So please let me know if you have any questions on the first 2 chapters, chapters 1 and 2. We covered that last week, and now we're going to be moving in. We're going to have chapters 4 here today on Tuesday, and then we march through chapters 3 and 5. That will be for this week. And don't forget, you have an exam at the end of this week on Friday, June the 3rd. So be sure that you're prepared for that along the way. So let me go ahead and get the slides pulled up here, and we can go ahead and start our class discussion. What I'd like to do is sort of do a reflect and recap on our last chapter, which was chapter 1, and be sure that, again, if you have any questions. An important part here is understanding the different types of work teams that were discussed in the textbook. Obviously, depending on the situation, the organization, depending on geography, functional areas, whatever the strategy, goals, and objectives are, there could be a specific work team for that particular organization's situation. You could also combine. I mean, certainly you could have a cross-functional team that serves as a virtual team as well. I think I mentioned in the last discussion that that's kind of where I quote unquote grew up in industry and in business. Was I had the blessing and opportunities to be a part of cross-functional teams, many of which were virtual because of geography. So important to understand the different attributes and definitions of them. We did go through some different obstacles to success. So I asked you to sort of reflect on teams and what makes teams successful. What makes teams struggle, right? What are some of the challenges that teams go through? And here are some of the obstacles to success. So truly understand groupthink, the definition of groupthink, and moving forward through your academic journey, your internships, and as you move into your careers post-graduation, think of ways that you can mitigate these obstacles, especially groupthink. There should be a time in meetings and things where you have the courage to stand up and respectfully challenge, certainly again with facts and data, not necessarily opinions. But if you do feel like that the group is conforming because of group pressure and making decisions and really failing to consider outside influences, that's a great opportunity for you to step up and sort of say so with regards to that. Definitely some team member roles. This is where your interpersonal skills. I know some of you are incoming freshmen, first-year students. Some of you are in your 3rd and 4th year working on your minor. So I realize you're in different maturity paths as far as your academic situation, even in your development, your interpersonal development. But I'll say this, no matter whether you're 18, 28, 48, or 88, we all have to understand roles and responsibilities in certain situations, in certain environments. And, it's important to, to be able to evaluate the environment and the situation and be sure that, that there's someone that's, taking over or taking the role of project management, understanding when tasks are needed in order to meet certain goals and objectives. Is the project on time? What's the budget look like? And so if no one is doing that, then someone should. And that's, I think, becomes a responsibility, usually of someone that has a business savvy or the business acumen on a team can do that. And then certainly relationship building. I just got back from Ireland, had, fantastic trip there with some amazing Pamplin students. And, we would reflect every morning and usually at dinner. And the big takeaway was, the Irish culture and how they utilize their relationships in order to help one another and or to help people that they care about and trust. And, it's an island of 5 million people, but it seems like they know 6 million people on the island, meaning that, they want to tear down walls and introduce and sort of share the story of who they are and what they're about as a society and as a culture, and certainly try to help one another. And so that relationship, chemistry, empathizing, all of that really helps to develop teams and organizations. And then certainly there are some, there can be some toxic situations within an organization when we start talking about blocking roles where people begin to present opinions, as if they're facts. They maybe have data, but they interpret the data just to align with what their personal goals or what their personal mission is. They may stall or deflect. One of the worst things is, not answering emails or not answering phone calls or not attending meetings. These are stalls, and this is deflecting responsibility. And then typically people like that in organizations will then come back once everything's done and go, well, I wasn't included. You didn't include me. And so that type of dysfunction within an organization or dysfunctional members within an organization, again, can bring toxicity to a project, to a company, and really derail what the original intent and strategy of that looks like. So be sure to look at that within the textbook. There's figure 1.8 in the text, certainly can give you some more parts of that. So again, just a quick reflection of chapter 1. Again, if you have questions about chapter 1, feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to move now into chapter 4, ethics and corporate social responsibility. A reminder here, you should have read the chapter by now. The goal is that you're reading the chapters before the module, before the videos, if there are any, and before the slide deck, so that you have a general understanding. I am the first to admit that just because you read something does not necessarily make you an expert. That's why we have, that's why we have classes. That's why we have these video modules, is to sort of help clarify and or increase the knowledge that you perhaps gained, and or affirm the knowledge or assumptions that you may have gained through your readings. Again, the learning objectives, I'm not going to go through each and every one of these. Definitely understand as you're reading through the textbook, the various learning objectives and the things that should come out of this. Certainly, these are areas when it comes to exam time and study. So for first-year students, this is the audience I'm speaking to. If you're a junior or senior, this is probably not relevant or as much relevancy for you. But if you're a first-year student or even perhaps a sophomore, one of the big parts of moving into college is time management. It's understanding the expectations. Learning objectives help to define what those expectations are for that particular chapter. And so as you start to take your time and understand what you should be learning, what you should be gaining out of each module, out of each chapter, this is an awesome checklist for you to be able to do that. Okay, so again, helping you start to navigate and transition from high school to the university. These are just some of the things that we'll talk about throughout the semester. So enough about that. What are ethics? I want you to kind of take a moment in your mind, either based on your readings, based on your own learned experiences. What are ethics? And this is always a nice opportune time to write that down. So take the next minute, maybe pause the video at this moment and start to think, what are some words that come to your mind when you see the word ethics? What does that mean to you? So pause here, reflect on that, and then we'll come back on the other side. So now that you've thought through that, you've taken some notes on it, the ethical piece here is really understanding what to know right from wrong, to know when you're practicing one instead of the other. So, there should be an alarm, an internal alarm or an intuition that says, this is not correct. What I'm doing here is wrong. It could be something as simple as, speed limit. So speed limit on campus, 25. And so when someone's doing 32, 35, they know it. There's a speedometer right in the dashboard. It's about 18 inches away from our eyes. Many of us travel Interstate 81, right? Trying to get from point A to point B. And it always amazes me, speed limit 65, I set my cruise at 70. So I know I'm actually doing 5 over. And then next thing you know, I look in the rear view mirror or in the side mirror and someone is just flying past me. And, in my head, I think they have to know the difference between right and wrong. And so then we question ourselves, why are there so many accidents on Interstate 81? Because there's people, right, that don't necessarily want to follow the rules. They know right, but they're choosing to do wrong. And so acting ethically in business means more than just simply obeying laws and regulations. Okay, so the story I just gave, the analogy I just gave, the experience I just gave as far as speeding, that's not necessarily business, right? But certainly laws and there's regulations behind that. But it goes beyond that. It's like, competing fairly. So, understanding, we're going to talk a little bit about stocks and insider trading in just a moment. The other part is declining to put your own interest above those of your company, its owners and its workers. And so within a business, you may be a salaried worker. There's an expectation that you're working plus or minus 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. plus or minus 40 hours per week. And, now that we're in this remote environment, I think it's even worse than that. It's from an efficiency standpoint, but there's supposed to be this honor system that, you're going to work from 8 till 5. You're going to come in. And even in my experience, people come in at 8:15, they leave at 4:30, they take 2-hour lunches. That's putting those interests above those of the company owners and others, doing no harm to others, being honest. And so, if you're going to be in business, you obviously need a strong sense of what's right and wrong. How do you treat people is another part of that. Not going to get into the specifics. There certainly is, the case study that's in the textbook. It came from 2002. It may seem old, 20 years ago. I think it is still a fantastic case study, partly because of the number of times that someone could have said something and unfortunately did not. And then the consequences, the broad consequences that happen when you look at, Bernie Ebbers, who was the CEO, and, you start to look at him being handcuffed and walked out of the company that he helped to build. And the other reason why we bring up this is that after this particular scandal, and this was one of a number of different scandals that had happened during that particular time frame. So from 1999 till about 2002, there were a number of different failures along the way, typically around accounting, and what we would use the term "quote unquote" cooking the books, so to speak. And so you can see the number of penalties, $3.8 billion in fraud. And we're going to cover accounting and finance towards the end of the summer session, but can you imagine trying to hide $3.8 billion? Very, very difficult. Let's kind of define ethical issues and dilemmas. And this is an important time to pay attention. I would certainly spend some time in the textbook on these particular concepts. So ethical issues are sort of these broad, difficult social questions that quite frankly are very controversial. And I'm not going to get into the different things that are going on in current events right now that have socio-political implications. But as we all know, there's certainly some discussions over voting rights. There's discussions over gun rights. There's discussions over abortion rights, environmental protection. We have all of these things. And so these are social questions that, certainly depending on what side of a particular issue that you may or people may be on, those become difficult things to discuss and understand and really trying to come to a conclusion. Specifically to environmental protection, this is where there can be a trade-off between an economic factor and an environmental factor. But again, all of the the different ethical issues that we can kind of come up with and discuss, there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer depending on who you talk to, right? And so I always enjoy when Virginia Tech hosts, different opinions and there's a panel discussion. And I love the fact that, that we can have those types of understandings. We might not agree, but we can certainly try to understand and ultimately respect. Again, don't have to agree with it. We just had Cornell West. Professor West was here with his best friend. As it turns out, they are on two different ends of the spectrum, but they were discussing these ethical issues and social questions. Now, the difference here, an ethical dilemma are situations that involve an individual. So difficult decisions. And this is where people have to choose the right course of action. And it may be unclear whether there's going to be negative consequences for that person or not, right? So dilemmas are situations that that individuals have to make. There is typically a right path or a wrong path, but it may not be clear. There could be some ambiguity or uncertainty with that. And, there will carry, again, potentially some negative consequences if that particular person or persons are discovered or the issues are discovered. And so definitely spend some time here. The textbook, I think, does a nice job at defining it, but certainly do that. Let's go in to some ethical dilemmas and some examples. One is conflict of interest. And this is when an individual must choose between taking actions that promote their own personal interest or interest of their family, perhaps, or not taking the action. And some good examples here, does a person buy office supplies from their brother-in-law? Now, if you're in a publicly traded organization or in a state organization, there's clearly defined conflict of interest policies and procedures. For example, here at Virginia Tech, part of my employment is I had to sign a conflict of interest because I'm a business owner. And so I have to sign a statement that says that I will not, promote or use my particular small business to benefit the department or the college. And if someone wanted to use my particular business in that aspect, there is a process to ask for a deviation. So it's not that it can't be done, there just has to be an approval process that goes through that. There's also some decision-making paths and some opportunities that individuals that we should all ask ourselves when we're trying to make an ethical decision. So if we're contemplating, there's something tough that's waking us up at night, perhaps our supervisor, our boss, our manager, maybe it's even a colleague or a peer, there's something going through our mind. And so I love this particular cloud tree that we can sort of ask ourselves these 4 or 5 different questions. One is, will I be ashamed to tell my family, friends, coworkers, or boss? If it's found out, how would I feel if I had to face my loved ones, right? Is the action illegal? I mean, that should be a first immediate stop, part of that. Will I be embarrassed if the action is written up in an online article? Think about the number of celebrities, the number of government officials that have had to resign or apologize or step back for something that was found out online. And, I think that, again, these become good questions, good opportunities for us to step back, ask ourselves, is this action ethical or not? What I'm about to do, is it ethical or not? Next few slides, I'm just kind of go through. There's obviously a number of ethical or ethics scandals found out in government. You can see them on the far left, far left of the screen, I should say. And this is interesting. I would say we probably could add one per day. There's just this week. I haven't seen it in Morning Brew yet, but there are 3 congressmen that are being investigated just this week, an open investigation. One, based on an inappropriate social affair, love affair with a staff member, that did not get reported. Another one is about spending too much money. Just recently, the head of CNN had to step down, Jeff Zucker, because he was having a relationship with a subordinate that was not revealed. And that was certainly, ethics. You can see all the different situations within business. Again, there's the Worldcom. Again, during 1999 to 2002, you had Tyco, Adelphi, Enron. All of these were part of that. And sometimes there are ethical situations, ethical scandals that maybe we don't think that they are until we start to peel back the onion, start to understand. And you can see here some different ones. I mean, Lowe's had to settle $8.6 million based on a disability. And so they had, fired they fired thousands of workers with disabilities because of a rigid leave policy. Target had to pay $2.8 million because of discriminatory hiring tests. That was just a few years ago. Nestle, $5.16 million. I mean, amazing. You can see here just on hiring practices or termination practices. These are also, they know the difference between right and wrong. I mean, just because someone has a disability doesn't mean they should be fired, right? We should think about that. Now, because of all the situations 20 years ago, Sarbanes and Oxley Act, which is the Public Company Accounting Reform and Investor Protection Act, this was a bipartisan agreement. You can see there George W. Bush, was president at the time, signed it into law. It is still law today, but we still have problems, right? I mean, 20 years later, we still have problems. Now, Sarbanes and Oxley still being enforced. Publicly traded companies have to abide by the rules, regulations of Sarbanes-Oxley. It's also known as the SOX. Even privately held companies, a company that I was just recently with for 12 years, had we had quarterly audits pertaining to SOX, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Just some other examples. You got here the Samsung CEO, bribery, embezzlement, and other charges. Volkswagen, I don't know if any of you know the story there of Volkswagen, where they misled not only the US government, but several European countries as well, for violating clean air. So they basically were falsifying their tests and inflating their EPA and miles per gallon. And I love this story because it was discovered by college students. There were students at West Virginia University in engineering lab, and they were the ones that discovered that the test and the stated miles per gallon were inaccurate and wrong. And they actually had reached out to Volkswagen a couple of different times. So Volkswagen had an opportunity to have a public relations situation, but they kept covering it up. And later on, you can see $25 billion later. Wells Fargo, I was actually impacted by this one. I was a mortgage holder with Wells Fargo, a mortgage customer with Wells Fargo, and ended up getting a letter in the mail thanking me for opening up a savings account, of which I had not done. And so they had a number of fake accounts that they had established. So Wells Fargo is a fairly large company. multinational company. They know a good accounting practices. They followed the general accepted accounting practices. They have legal departments there, but still somehow they had this ego, this opportunity that they felt like that they could set up these false situations. Then you get into ethics, right? And the difference between right and wrong, and maybe there's some gray area when you get into economic situations. So just a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, an EpiPen, right? So in 2008, an EpiPen was $100. In 2018, it was $500. Is that right? Is that wrong? Should government regulate how much a company can or can't make? But we all, hopefully you know what an EpiPen does. It basically can save the life of a human being, right? And so the CEO, the manufacturer of the EpiPen, was called to Capitol Hill. I usually play a video to show the exchange between. It was a bipartisan. This is one of the few times on Capitol Hill where there was bipartisanship. Republicans and Democrats alike were asking some pretty difficult questions of the CEO, and who, quite frankly, in her response, did not give very effective or reliable answers to it. Turns out they had about 90% of the market share. I mean, quite frankly, they just knew that they could get that particular price. So, if you turn it to a current event now, there is a lot of discussion in business and in government over the regulation of insulin, another situation where insulin prices have increased. And so, typically in the classroom at this point, we would have some discussions on what's right and wrong and regulations and this, should there not be, those are all there. So again, basic moral values, doing the right things. Many of us know this because of our learned experiences, our cultures, our values. Honesty is important here at Virginia Tech. That's why you're doing the honor code. I have you do the academic integrity modules and receive the badge. It's more than just a journey of taking a module, more than just a journey of taking a quiz. You have to practice this. You have to understand that you cannot lie, cheat, or steal, nor tolerate those that do. And the toleration is if you see something, you should say something. I had the honor to be a part of some honor code hearings this past semester and plan on being a part of some honor code hearings again in the fall. And it amazed me, being a part of that process, the number of violations that were actually submitted. Certainly there's a large number submitted by faculty and staff, by teaching assistants, graduate assistants, and things like that, because typically they're seeing it from a grading point of view. But a large number of the violations are actually submitted by fellow students, which is, again, doing the right thing, having the courage to step up. Perhaps it's a self-sacrifice, but understanding that integrity is, something that we work for. We part of our learned experience is who we are, what we're about, our values, how we were raised. A lot of our cultural humility, humanity comes into our integrity, but no one can take that away. People will try. People will definitely try to take that away on a number of different levels and different means. But we as human beings, we as people have to protect that integrity. And so when again, basic moral values, you can see there. And then doing things wrong. I mean, these are just some examples. Cruelty, cowardice, cheating can all be a part of this. There's an old saying, once a cheater, always a cheater. It's interesting, golf. Golf is an amazing business development opportunity in sport for men and women. You meet all day, or have meetings until 2 or 3 o'clock. This was sort of a tradition when I first got into business 25 to 30 years ago. It's starting to be practiced again. But one of the best things to do was to go play golf, right? And you can start to see on the golf course, are they fair? Do they have integrity? Do they kick the ball out from behind the tree? Do they pick up their putt when they should probably putt it in? How are they scoring themselves? Awesome opportunity to kind of see how people, score themselves, and how is their integrity measured when no one's looking, right? In that standpoint, I always say, I think from a business development standpoint, it's always nice to go to lunch or dinner with someone that you're, working on a business development opportunity. How do they treat the staff? How do they treat the people around them and the environment around? Are they genuine? Are they pleasant, or are they cruel? Again, just some simple ways to try to understand how people could do that. Not going to go through this particular chart. You certainly have this in the textbook. It's good, but it is a nice checklist to look at how to maintain honesty, integrity. It gets down to, even your, you could be on an internship or your first job. And what are your non-work related activities, like personal phone calls and emails, what we would call tube time? How much time are you on the internet when actually you should be working? And those are things that starts to speak to honesty and integrity. I would say now that we're in a very hybrid or virtual mode for organizations, that they're probably trying to monitor this a little bit more. The other thought is being honest with customers and management, coworkers, competitors, and the public. Sounds simple. Sounds like an aha or an oh yes moment, but not everyone is honest, and we have to be sure that we have that accountability and we keep each other honest. So how do I know if an action is unethical, right? And it really gets down to something as simple as the golden rule test. So the golden rule test says, I will treat others how I would want to be treated. Kind of makes sense, right? The other would be, what if others find out? What if it becomes public? And the last one that I love there, and this is something that I actually kind of learned before the military, but certainly my military experience brought this out, is to do the right thing even if no one is looking. All right, so do the right thing even if no one is looking. So, in the military, many times you're on, for example, I was on duty 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., monitoring, driving around, checking on certain doors, and security could have easily have just parked in a parking lot and slept, right? But that's not doing the right thing. Doing the right thing was protecting my fellow shipmates and making sure I was doing my job and doing that, or making decisions when no one's looking, but knowing that those decisions have consequences and could have life or death consequences with that. So some questions that you should ask, is it okay to accept a pair of sports tickets from a supplier? Can I buy office supplies from my brother-in-law? Is it inappropriate to donate company funds to local charities? And so, it's important to sort of think about these things. Certainly the sports tickets pieces, arguably the best answer there is no, you should not. This is always where students will say, well, my mom or my dad or my cousin, they do this all the time. And I'll start to ask, well, is it publicly held? Is it privately held? At the end of the day, though, think about it. If someone is giving you something, many times there's an expectation that they're going to get something back, a quid pro quo situation. And in business, this can happen quite frequently. So, for example, with the sports tickets, you could say, hey, remember I took you to that Virginia Tech football game, or remember we went to, game 1 of the World Series, and remember that, and got you a hotel room, we had dinner, we had nice drinks, you brought your spouse along, it was a fantastic time, and now I want to put in a price increase. Okay, and so that leverage that could be used as leverage in order for them, that's a particular supplier, to get what they want, i.e. the price increase. And so it becomes this conflict of interest, again, putting the personal interest, hey, love going to a sports game, right? but is that in the best interest of the organization long term? Okay. Now, rationalization, usually in class, we'll get some examples of this. What does rationalization mean? It really just becomes making excuses. So, this is when individuals know they've done wrong. There's misconduct. They understand. We've seen this in the media, with the quote unquote Me Too movement, where people will start to make excuses for what's going on. And some of that rationalization will say, well, my behavior isn't really illegal or immoral. They'll try to convince themselves that it is okay, and they'll operate in sort of this gray area where there's really no clear evidence. There's really nothing that says that they've done wrong. They've either hidden it intentionally or they just know that it can't be done. But they'll just say, hey, what I'm doing is okay. It's been done before. Another one is when somebody will say, well, my action is in everyone's best interest. This is what happened in the Worldcom situation, where Betty Vinson just said, hey, I'm doing what's best. That's what the CFO wants me to do. Simpson, the CFO, that's what he wants me to do. Number two, the company could go bankrupt. So I need to do this. It's in everyone's best interest. And so they'll act in a certain way. No one will find out. No one will find out what I've done. They'll start to rationalize that way. And then the key point there in number three, always act as if you're being watched. Again, do things as if there's going to be an audit, or do things as if there's someone there. And then the other one, and this is where Betty Vinson and the Worldcom team, great example, got caught up into. The company will condone my action and protect me, right? And so Betty Vinson honestly felt like that her actions were good for the company and the boss, and that the boss would accept full responsibility. But as you read, they were the first ones to throw Betty Vinson under the bus, right? They quickly said, that was her own deeds and how to do that. So how do organizations improve business ethics? And again, this is something that has, tried to be practiced. This is from a Fast Company article from a few years ago. Top management has to adopt a corporate code of conduct. Sounds easy. Most companies are doing this. Publicly held companies have to do this. Their shareholders and or stakeholders are going to demand that. The other one would be that employees have to understand that all employees have to act ethically. Very, very, very important. And the last one is training and development. So year after year after year, there has to be training and development. When I was in publicly held companies, whether it was a division of Warner Lambert, division of Pfizer, Rubbermaid, we did have this on an annual basis, was mandatory training and development on ethical implications. My last company was privately held. And so while we had a culture of ethics, we weren't necessarily demanded to take training every year. Many of us decided to do that on our own, though, whether it was attending conferences, and there would be tracks, ethical business tracks within those conferences, and or online learning, just taking our own initiative to stay up to date on what was considered good, bad, or ugly, if you will. And some other ways is setting up an office, where people can communicate on an anonymous basis of what could be going on in an organization that's unethical or could be considered or needs to be investigated to understand if it's unethical. And so this is an opportunity to understand the definition of whistleblowers. And whistleblowers are those people who report illegal or unethical behavior. Remember, as the textbook talks about, whistleblowers can be blackballed. It could be the end of their career. We just had this happen in government over the last couple of years in the Trump administration. We had, a member of the national security team that had overheard a conversation between President Trump and I just lost my train of thought. Anyway, between another leader and the conversation was inappropriate by their particular standards. So the national security advisor submitted that they felt like what they heard was illegal by standards of the U.S. And so it turns out, though, that particular NSA officer was escorted out of the building and fired because the administration had felt like that was wrong on their particular part. The other part is involving outsiders, so stakeholders, suppliers, distributors, customers, and trying to build a true ethical understanding of what expectations could be. This happened. I was in sales and marketing most recently, and we would get letters from our customers that would say that they were not allowed to accept gifts at any time. And so typically this letter would come out in September or October because companies, around Thanksgiving or the holidays, the Christmas holidays, would send in gifts, might be food, it might be a turkey, whatever that gift is. Could be a bottle of wine, or maybe it's a particular favorite bottle of scotch. Just, cannot be done. And in these letters from these Fortune 50, Fortune 100 companies, basically said that, their employees cannot accept anything, not even a pen. And again, just to try to keep any type of impropriety or certain quid pro quo opportunities, certain leveraging opportunities out of the situation. So the ethics code must be enforced. This is critical. That if there is something, then it has to be followed through. The community, the culture of an organization has to see this and understand it. I think that's why it's important here at Virginia Tech with our Hokie code, our honor code, that it is enforced. If you see something, say something. And we have to be sure that we hold everyone accountable. Here's the code of ethics for Coca-Cola. It may have changed since this was last pulled out, but you can see here, this has come directly from their website. Talks about, never encourage or direct employees to achieve business results at the expense of ethical conduct or compliance with the code of law. Some other situations as it relates to international business or global business ethics, it's important to know the customs of different countries. Companies can have a great positive influence. So for example, I had a trip to Mexico one time and there was some monies left in my briefcase along with my colleagues, and basically came back to the conference room, found that and gave it back to them and just said, no, that's not the way that we do business. It may have been the way our predecessors did it, or it may have been the way we did business 10 or 15 years ago. It's not the way we're going to do business moving forward. And so hopefully those types of actions start to show that that there is a right and wrong, in that. So good training is important with regards to that. All right, let's switch gears. Corporate social responsibility. This is where corporations, organizations start to step up and go above and beyond, and start to balance responsibilities with legal, economic, ethical, and social decisions. And so, there's not necessarily a law that says a company has to be socially responsible. Certainly from an environmental standpoint, typically, or there are laws, whether they're local, regional, national laws that have to be followed, like consumer rights, wages and benefits. There are certain requirements for that. But philanthropy, for example, which is a good CSR practice, no one says that you have to have a philanthropy office or that you have to give back to the community. So that's going above and beyond. So there obviously are some commitments to employees, minimum wage, workers' comp. Again, don't have to have medical, dental, vision care. That's optional. You have to do that. Health and safety, very, very important. So the month of February in every organization, it has to be visually posted on a bulletin board. I think It can now be done digitally, but it has to be accessible to everyone. Even Virginia Tech practices this, but it basically is how many workplace accidents have there been in the previous year, and they measure it in different levels, whether it's a cut of a finger to loss of life and everywhere in between, and that has to be reported to the Department of Labor, and then it also again has to be accessible to everyone. The other part, and many of you are going to be business leaders in the future, you're going to be responsible for people and their health and safety. There is never, ever assume that safety is perfect. This is where training and development, awareness, this has to be a #1 priority with zero exceptions, and being able to practice this. I quite frankly think, I think quite frankly that most organizations have forgotten about this, and they don't necessarily practice it as well as they should. Here at Virginia Tech, every year, maybe every 2 years, faculty, staff have to go through training dealing with safety, as far as active shooter training and things of that nature. So certainly, I think this is where most organizations could do a better job at moving forward. There's certainly some consumer rights, the Federal Trade Commission, Consumer Product Safety Commission, FDA, which we've heard a lot about over the last couple of years. The Consumer Rights Act, though, which was passed during the Kennedy administration, really just had the 4 key parts here: the right to safe products, the right to be informed about a product, the right to choose what to buy, and the right to be heard. And you can see some different examples here of what that can be. I've been a part of an organization where we had to have a product recall. Never a fun thing to do, but it was, we were certainly challenged from a revenue standpoint and public relations standpoint. But more importantly, we had to do the right thing. The ethical thing to do is we knew that there could be an issue. It turns out it was not as broad or as heavy of an issue as that we had originally thought. But we ended up contacting the Consumer Product Safety Commission. We've voluntarily reported that. We made the recall and did that. Currently, here it is, the summer of 2022. Many of you probably have seen it on the news. The baby formula. There is a very large supply chain gap right now due to baby formula being recalled by a manufacturer. And again, that was a voluntary recall of that. Again, trying to get ahead of consumer product safety. So socially responsible, again, corporate philanthropy includes charitable donations. There could be social initiatives, which includes different forms of philanthropy. There on the left, you can see Habitat for Humanity. Whirlpool Corporation, for example, has a great partnership, with Whirlpool and working. They do that because that's what their employees want to do. They want to give back to the various communities. They're in Benton Harbor, Michigan. They've got plants down in Nashville, Tennessee as well. And, those communities want to help. That's where they live and work and play. So it gives them a chance to get out and do it. There's obviously some public relations opportunities for organizations like Whirlpool, where they've helped build homes for various people. And certainly those homes are going to have Whirlpool appliances, refrigerators, stoves, washers, and dryers. So there's certainly that opportunity, but an awesome thing. There on the right-hand side, that's actually my old organization where we went and worked at a women's resource center. So these are women, mothers, or single moms, or married people that have been abused. There's been a physical abuse, so they try to escape, and there's an anonymous place that they can go. This is up near Cleveland, Ohio. And so we take a day, and that's our social day where we go out and help the community. Again, don't have to. Whirlpool does not have to do that. Marble, my last company, does not have to do that. They want to do that. And so think about it from a social responsibility standpoint. That does cost money, right? So, that particular day there on the right-hand side, everyone got paid for that. And so there becomes this economic decision, this financial decision that has to be made, but it also feels good. So think about Virginia Tech and UPROSUM and that I may serve, and how do we use that, as you get into business and you become business leaders, what are some ways that, you could have a corporate social responsibility? It gets down to the triple bottom line: people, planet, and profit, right? People, planet, and profit, really trying to increase the enhanced quality of life. So enhancing the economic, the social, and the environmental areas. It's what's known as the triple bottom line. This is where companies, especially publicly traded companies, as I mentioned before, really are trying to weigh on this. Again, it used to be a public relations situation for them. I think now it has become more of a stakeholder requirement for them to do that. And I think your generation is pushing us to be different. You're pushing us to choose to do things above and beyond original expectations from that. Most admired companies. This is a little bit dated from 2019, but probably hasn't moved too much. But there's actually, so Fortune magazine, for example, rates the most admired companies. And so if you're in let's say, for example, you're in a purchasing management role, or you're looking to invest, perhaps you would utilize this type of data to make those decisions. For example, Microsoft at number 6, if there's going to be a large purchase of products or software, perhaps there could be a governmental requirement or a contractual requirement that the purchasing manager or purchasing team, cross-functional team, has to evaluate, the social responsibility, the environmental responsibility, and these most admired companies. There could be a rank from that standpoint. You can also get into what's called corporate citizenship. So again, corporate social responsibility can also be measured by this corporate citizenship. And so the Dow Jones utilizes what's known as the sustainability indexes or indices. And you can see here, economic, social, and environmental, once again, coming together. I encourage you, or not only encourage you, I strongly suggest that you watch the video at the end of the chapter. There's a link. It's based on FOXCONN and the FOXCONN video. Again, this is a manufacturer for contract manufacturer for Apple. So Foxconn is a Taiwanese-based company, and they manufacture a lot of consumer products, including the iPads, iPods, iPhones, all kinds of different products for Apple. They also do manufacturing for other brands as well. And in this video, it talks about the problem. And so I want you to watch this video, understand the difference between what's right and wrong. Look at the human condition that's there. There's a corporate social responsibility that comes into play. There's also some ethical behavior that also comes into play. So I'd like for you to watch that video, understand it. You certainly will see questions either on a quiz or an exam about that. The Foxconn video will kind of share that, a pay comparison, $23 versus $2. You can see the hours per week in the US is about 41, in China around 60. Interestingly enough, Foxconn is a global company. They announced a $10 billion plan to build LCD displays in Wisconsin. And looks here, so they're not just in China and Taiwan or Vietnam. They now have a place here in the States as well. Partly, I think, to alleviate some of the concerns that perhaps some of the shareholders of Apple had at that particular time. Key takeaways. So this gives us a chance to look at the key takeaways. At the end of the chapter, be sure that you look at those, you understand them. If there's a question with regards to any of those, be sure to reach out to me. I'm always available for Q&A, whether it's during office hours or times that are more convenient to you. So with that, we will go ahead and wrap up chapter 4, ethics and corporate social responsibility. Just a reminder that you're doing your academic integrity module. Be sure to get that done and upload those results. Be sure that your name is with the badge. If it's just the badge, I don't know if that's you or someone else. So you have to have the results, have to have your name attached to it so that I can confirm. All right, with that, take care. Keep doing great things. We'll talk to you soon.